Welcome to the Sleep Science channel. Maybe your day stretched longer than expected. Or maybe time itself has felt unusual lately, passing too quickly in some moments and barely moving in others. It's something many people notice, especially in quiet hours. A strange relationship with time, as if it bends around certain thoughts, stretches through routines, and disappears entirely during others. This video moves slowly with little visual change. It's designed that way, not to hold your attention, but to rest beside it. If you find yourself drawn to this kind of pace, you're always welcome to subscribe. Tonight, we're exploring something you may have already sensed: that modern time doesn't feel natural. It's structured, counted, scheduled, but not always lived in. There's a quiet tension between the clocks around us and the sense of time within us. Meetings, calendars, alarms, they belong to one kind of time. But waiting, longing, boredom, memory, those belong to another. The brain responds to both, but it doesn't truly feel them the same way. And somewhere in that gap, between what is measured and what is experienced, something very human gets pulled out of rhythm. We weren't built to live inside rigid hours. For most of human existence, time was something sensed, not scheduled. It rose and fell with the sun. It drifted with the seasons. Days passed, but they weren't broken into neat blocks. People moved when they were ready, worked when the light allowed, and rested when things grew quiet. There were no minutes to manage, no ticking reminders. Just a general awareness that things were changing. Slowly, naturally. In cycles that match the rhythms of the body, now everything is counted. Wake-up times, deadlines, notifications, hours chopped into meetings and breaks. Seconds filled with glances at a screen. We are surrounded by measurements. And yet, despite all of it, time still feels strange. Sometimes a full day disappears in what feels like a blink. Other times, 5 minutes can stretch unbearably long. And it isn't just about being busy or bored. It's deeper than that. Because your experience of time doesn't come from the clock. It comes from within, shaped by attention, memory, emotion, and context. This is why 10 minutes waiting in line can feel longer than 2 hours spent in conversation, or why a single moment can stretch wide in memory, even if it passed quickly in real life. The structure of time is consistent, but the feeling of time is not. And that's where things begin to unravel in the modern world. Because we are asked to live by the clock, but we feel time very differently. And our brains were never quite designed to bridge that gap easily. In truth, the brain doesn't have a built-in clock that tells perfect time. It estimates, it predicts, it fills in gaps, it stretches and compresses moments based on what matters. When something new or emotionally important happens, the brain pays closer attention and the moment feels longer. When something is repetitive or routine, it barely registers and time seems to slip away. This is why novelty makes time feel full, while routine makes it vanish. And it's why childhood often seems so expansive in memory, filled with newness, sensations, firsts, while adult years can blur together, moving fast in hindsight, even if they felt long in the moment. These shifts aren't mistakes. They're reflections of how perception works. The brain doesn't care about exact durations. It cares about meaning, change, and internal state. In survival terms, this makes sense. Feeling time accurately wasn't as important as noticing danger, opportunity, or connection. So, the brain evolved to register what's relevant, and everything else becomes background, This is still true today, but the environment has changed, the pace has changed, and that quiet internal sense of time struggles to keep up with the structured external one. This creates a subtle tension, a sense of disconnection between how long something should feel and how long it actually does. You may notice this during a workday when hours are scheduled tightly, but your focus drifts. Or in the evening when you finally stop, and suddenly the whole day seems to catch up at once. That lag, that stretch, that compression, it's all the result of a brain trying to make sense of time it wasn't built to track so precisely. The more structured and fast-paced the world becomes, the more we notice how time feels off. Not because anything is wrong with us, but because our internal systems were never designed for this kind of environment. Think about how modern life treats time. It is optimized, scheduled, and subdivided to the smallest unit. We are taught to manage it, spend it, save it, and even monetize it. Time becomes something to be controlled, but the human brain doesn't experience time as a line of identical moments. It experiences time through texture, through change, emotion, and memory. So when nothing changes, when every hour looks and feels the same, time becomes difficult to feel. Days blend together. Weeks pass unnoticed. And the strange thing is, even when we're busy, even when our calendars are full, we can still feel disconnected from time. Not because we're idle, but because the experience of time has been flattened by routine. This is one reason why people often feel disoriented during long stretches of sameness. When every day contains the same locations, the same tasks, the same rhythm, the brain begins to compress that time. In memory, it shrinks. The days feel short, the weeks fly, but in the moment, it can feel slow, restless, even dull. This paradox of time feeling too fast and too slow at the same time is a sign that the brain is struggling to attach significance to repeated patterns. Without clear markers of change, the mental sense of time collapses into something formless. You may reach the end of the day and wonder where the time went, or you may check the clock repeatedly, surprised at how little has passed. And over time, this can become more than just confusing. It can become unsettling. Because when time feels wrong, it's not just an abstract problem. It affects how grounded we feel in our lives. Time is the background of everything we do. And when that background becomes unstable, too fast, too empty, too stretched, it affects the rest of our perception. Decisions feel heavier. Motivation becomes harder to maintain. We might feel like we're behind, even if we're on schedule, or like we're wasting time, even when we're fully engaged. These aren't failures of discipline or attitude. They are signals, signs that our natural internal sense of time is out of sync with the artificial systems we're trying to live inside. One of the clearest examples of this misalignment is the experience of waiting. When we wait for something important, time slows down dramatically. Even short delays can feel endless. A single minute at a red light, a pause before a message arrives, a buffering video, the moments stretch. Not because the seconds are longer, but because our attention has nowhere else to go. The brain begins to loop, to scan, to rehearse what might happen next. And this internal activity makes the moment feel thick, heavy, stretched out. The brain, in a sense, is leaning into the future, trying to anticipate what's coming. And that makes the present feel slow and dense. Contrast that with being deeply absorbed in something. When attention is full, time often disappears. hours can pass unnoticed. This is sometimes called flow, but it doesn't require productivity or achievement. It can happen during a walk, a conversation, even just watching the movement of clouds. In those moments, we're not measuring time when we're living inside it, and the brain stops estimating, stops tracking, stops pulling us forward or backward. Instead, it settles. It's a kind of synchrony between internal and external rhythm, and it feels quiet, balanced, whole. But in modern life, that synchrony is increasingly rare. We are asked to divide attention constantly, to switch contexts, answer messages, remember tasks, all while keeping pace with external schedules. The mind becomes fragmented. It's always partially anchored in now, partially drifting toward what's next. And this division of attention pulls at the fabric of time. It makes the present feel thin and the future feel crowded. We begin to sense time not as a place to be, but as something pressing against us, a deadline, a countdown, a pressure. And over time, that pressure accumulates, even if we're not consciously aware of it. It's easy to dismiss these sensations as ordinary stress. And in some ways they are, but they're also deeper than that, because time is not just a measurement. It's a feeling, a shape that our awareness moves through. When that shape becomes distorted, we feel it everywhere. In our thoughts, our sleep, our sense of purpose. We start saying things like, "I don't know where the time went," or "this year went by so fast," or "the days are dragging." These aren't casual remarks. They're symptoms, indicators that our internal rhythms are no longer matching the world around us. And perhaps, even more importantly, they point to something we often overlook, that we need healthy time perception to feel anchored, to feel alive inside our lives. When time collapses or drags, we feel unmoored. We lose the natural landmarks of experience. We forget what we did yesterday. We stop looking forward to tomorrow. And life becomes a blur, either a rush or a fog, depending on the moment. This is not a failure of motivation. It's not a lack of gratitude. It's the natural result of a brain trying to make sense of an unnatural timeline. There's something else worth noticing. In traditional cultures, or in natural environments where time isn't broken into tasks and notifications, people tend to feel time in broader strokes. Morning, afternoon, evening, sunrise, sunset, changes in light, temperature, sound. Time is experienced through the senses, not through numbers. There is no countdown, no start or stop signal, just movement. And this movement aligns with the body's own cycles. Hunger, alertness, sleepiness, energy rising and falling. The sense of time isn't imposed from the outside. It emerges from within as part of living. But most people today live in a very different structure. We wake to alarms, plan in 15-minute blocks, and rely on devices to remind us what to do next. And slowly, the internal sense of time fades into the background. We stop noticing when our body feels ready. We respond instead to when the clock tells us it's time. Over time, this erodes something quiet but essential: the ability to feel our place in time. Not as a task or a role, but as a presence, a lived experience. When we wake up, we're already behind. When we pause, we feel guilt. When we finish, we plan the next thing. There's little space to simply exist inside a moment, because modern time is measured by productivity, not presence. But the brain doesn't respond to checklists. It responds to rhythm. It calms when patterns are meaningful, not just efficient. This is why even a simple routine, waking with the sun, eating when hungry, sleeping when tired, can restore a sense of time that feels human again. It doesn't need to be perfect, just lived. Even memory is shaped by how we experience time. When days are filled with variety, rich in sensation and change, they leave stronger imprints. We remember them more clearly. But when time is flat and repetitive, the mind stores less. There's less contrast, less to hold on to. This is why weeks can vanish in memory even if they were filled with activity. The Tsakchidisutsaik brain didn't register enough change to build distinct memories. It's not about how much we did. It's about how different it felt. Emotional tone, novelty, context. These shape the mental timeline far more than duration. So if you've ever looked back on a year and wondered where it went, this may be why. The clock kept moving. But the brain didn't feel enough change to mark the passing. And this has a quiet consequence. Because memory is how we build a sense of self over time. It's how we recognize growth, change, meaning. If time blurs in memory, the self can feel blurred too. We begin to feel like nothing is happening, even when a great deal is. We question whether we're making progress, whether life is moving forward, whether we're truly present in our own story. But the problem isn't always with what's happening. It's with how time is being processed. And that processing depends on space, variation, and reflection, not speed. This is also why silence can feel unsettling in a world full of time pressure, because silence stretches time. It removes the markers, the noise, the prompts that move us forward. And without those cues, we become aware of time in a rawer way. Minutes feel longer. Stillness becomes more noticeable. And for many, this feels uncomfortable. It reveals just how untrained we've become in sitting inside time without managing it, without filling it. But this discomfort is also a clue. It points to a part of us that still wants to feel time fully, not just track it. A part that longs for moments that breathe, moments that don't need to be justified by output or achievement. Moments that are allowed to be simply because we are in them. When people talk about wanting to slow down, they're often talking about more than just pace. They're talking about restoring a sense of meaning to time, about being able to feel it again, not in a sentimental or poetic way, but in a quiet, grounded way, where time has weight, shape, and texture. Where a morning isn't just a prelude to productivity, but a space that holds a certain kind of light, a certain smell in the air, a certain rhythm of thought. These things can't be rushed. They can't be scheduled. They emerge when we stop compressing time into tasks, when we let it expand a little around the edges of our attention. But that expansion doesn't always come easily, because modern systems reward speed and output, and most of us have learned to link our worth to how much we get done. So when we slow down, we often feel guilt or anxiety, as if we're failing to keep up. But this feeling isn't a signal that we're doing something wrong. It's a residue, a conditioned response, a habit of thought, and it fades slowly when we learn to trust the value of simply being in time rather than chasing it. There's a kind of recalibration that happens in those quieter moments. The mind begins to settle, the body begins to soften, and time begins to feel less like a pressure and more like a place, one that can hold us rather than push us forward. And when that shift happens, even slightly, the experience of life changes. Not dramatically, not instantly, but gently. A cup of tea feels longer. A walk feels fuller. A pause between conversations begins to carry meaning. We notice small changes in light, in sound, in sensation. And the brain, which once struggled to make sense of rushed, flattened time, starts to attune again to the slow rhythms it understands. Rhythms of breath, rhythms of movement, rhythms of thought. These are the kinds of time the brain was built to follow. Not seconds and deadlines, but patterns. Moments that echo, repeat, and evolve gently. Moments that the body can live inside without having to rush through them. And in those patterns, memory returns. Presence returns. Even sleep becomes easier, because the brain no longer feels like it has to keep watch against the next signal, the next shift, the next interruption. It begins to rest not just because it's tired, but because the sense of time has softened. The need to measure has faded. And what's left is something much simpler, the quiet experience of being in a moment without needing to move past it. It's worth noting how deeply technology has changed our relationship with time. Not just through screens or schedules, but through the constant presence of instant feedback. In earlier times, waiting was normal. There was space between action and result. Letters took days to arrive. News unfolded slowly. Meals took time to prepare. There was rhythm in the delay, a natural pacing that shaped how people moved through the day. But now, almost anything can happen instantly. Messages appear in seconds. Questions are answered immediately. Entertainment begins with a single tap. And while this offers convenience, it also reshapes how we feel time. When everything is immediate, the brain begins to expect immediacy. It starts to feel unsettled during pauses, even short ones, a few seconds of loading, and we reach for something else. A quiet moment in conversation and we fill it. A delay in response, and we wonder if something is wrong. These aren't flaws, they are adaptations. The brain adjusts to the tempo it's given. But the cost of constant immediacy is a kind of erosion, an erosion of patience, of depth, of presence. Because when nothing takes time, nothing has time to settle. And we begin to lose the sense that time itself can hold meaning beyond delivery. This change is subtle. It doesn't announce itself loudly, but it appears in small ways. In how we check our phones without thinking, in how difficult it is to sit still without input, in how sleep feels delayed, even when we're tired, because the mind is still processing layers of short, fragmented interactions. It shows up in the inability to focus for long, in the restlessness that rises during silence, in the strange emptiness that can follow even a full day of activity. These are signs that the brain's sense of time has been stretched thin, pulled in too many directions, too quickly, without enough room to breathe. And the brain, despite all its complexity, still needs that room. It needs slowness to consolidate memory. It needs stillness to process emotion. It needs unstructured time to connect dots that structured time can't reach. This is why some of the clearest insights, the most vivid memories, or the deepest feelings often arise not during tasks, but in the spaces between them. During a walk, a shower, a moment of quiet looking. These are not wasted moments. They are the moments that restore coherence to time. They allow the internal timeline to realign, to expand, settle, and make sense of experience. But in many environments, these moments are crowded out. The day becomes a series of inputs, tasks, updates, interactions, with no time to let anything unfold. It's like planting seeds, but never letting them grow. The soil is disturbed too often, and nothing has time to root. This isn't just a metaphor. Emotionally and cognitively, the brain needs time to settle. Without it, experience becomes shallow. We may still function, complete tasks, attend meetings, respond to requests, but underneath there is a growing sense of fatigue, a subtle loss of orientation, a feeling that time is moving but we're not quite moving with it. Over weeks and months, this can begin to affect how we feel about ourselves. Productivity may remain high, but meaning becomes harder to find. Activities lose their flavor. Days feel repetitive, even if they're full, and rest no longer feels restorative. Not because we're not resting, but because the shape of time never changed. It remained thin, fast, external, and the brain was never given the slow, thick, internal time it needs to truly process. This is why some people feel more rested after a slow afternoon than a full night of sleep. It's not just about rest, it's about the type of time we inhabit. There is also something to be said about how time relates to identity. Who we believe we are is tied to when and how we experience change. Growth requires time. So does grief. So does joy. These states are not tasks. They are not entries on a calendar. They unfold across time in patterns that are not always linear. And when the external world demands speed, there's less space for these natural emotional processes to complete. We end up trying to heal quickly, to adapt quickly, to find meaning quickly. But the brain resists. It doesn't work that way. It resists being rushed through transitions. It needs to loop back, to revisit, to dwell. And when it can't, something stays unfinished. A feeling that time moved on, but we didn't. Or that we moved, but something important was left behind. Even joy becomes thinner when there isn't time to feel it. When we experience something beautiful, but we're already thinking about what's next. When we achieve something, but it's already time to chase the next goal. The emotion is real, but it doesn't have time to echo. And without that echo, it doesn't settle into memory. It doesn't become part of the self. This is one reason why some people look back at photos and feel strangely disconnected. The event happened. It was important. But it passed too quickly to take root. The shape of time was too narrow. What helps often is not to change everything, but to notice small places where time can widen again. A few moments without input, a meal without a screen, a pause between tasks, a conversation that has no fixed ending. These are not grand gestures, but they are signals into the brain, to the body, to the self, that not all time has to be managed. Some of it can simply be lived. And slowly, these signals add up. They tell the nervous system that it doesn't have to stay on alert, that it can rest, that not every second needs to be filled. And in that quiet, the perception of time begins to shift again. It may not happen all at once, but over time, real, lived time, the sense of rhythm begins to return. Moments feel longer. Emotions feel clearer. Memory becomes easier. And the world, even if it remains busy, feels a little more spacious, a little more human. Not because time itself has changed, but because we are no longer forcing ourselves to feel it in ways we were never built to. We begin to feel time not as a pressure, but as a companion. Something that moves with us, not ahead of us, not against us, but beside us, step by step, breath by breath, moment by moment. This companion-like experience of time, gentle, unfolding, unhurried, is perhaps the most natural to us. It mirrors the pace of nature, of seasons turning, of growth that cannot be forced. Plants do not rush to bloom. Rivers do not hurry to reach the sea. Even the rotation of the earth, so constant and dependable, takes its time. These natural cycles shaped the early human mind. For thousands of years, time was experienced as part of the environment, not apart from it. Days followed the light, not the calendar. Years were felt through temperature, harvest, the position of stars. This time was not invisible. It was lived, noticed, carried in the body as much as in the mind. But now, for many people, time is increasingly abstract. We live by numbers, not by changes in the air or the length of shadows. The sense of when something should happen is often determined by expectation, not sensation. We wake, not because we're rested, but because the alarm says we must. We eat when schedules allow, not when hunger arrives. We rest only after all the tasks are done, even when the body has been asking for hours. And little by little, this disconnect becomes normal. We begin to believe that time is something outside of us, something to be managed, controlled, beaten. But that belief puts pressure on something that was never meant to carry so much weight. Because internal time, the sense of time as felt, not counted, doesn't respond to pressure. It doesn't move faster just because we ask it to. It doesn't respond to urgency, only rhythm. This is why healing takes as long as it takes. Why creativity can't always be summoned on command. Why some emotions linger for days, even when we try to move past them. The internal clock is tuned to meaning, not speed. It follows the curves of experience. It slows down when we are uncertain and speeds up when we are immersed. It pauses when we are overwhelmed and loops when something is unresolved. This kind of time can't be scheduled. It must be felt. That's why there can be such a deep sense of relief in returning to slower moments. Even a short break without stimulation, a few minutes outside, a walk without headphones, a meal without multitasking, can allow the internal sense of time to emerge again. It may feel unfamiliar at first, even uncomfortable, but it's also grounding because it reconnects us to a part of ourselves that doesn't run on deadlines, a part that remembers how to be, not just how to do. And in that remembering, a kind of clarity begins to form. It's also in this slower time that we often rediscover attention. Not the scattered kind that reacts to alerts or jumps between tasks, but the steady, curious kind that notices detail. That kind of attention doesn't rush. It lingers. It observes without demand. And as it settles, time begins to feel less like a series of tasks and more like a spacious field. In that field, things can unfold naturally. Thoughts can drift. Emotions can arise without needing to be explained. And the body can release the tension that builds when every moment is supposed to be useful. Of course, not every hour can be like this. The world has its needs, its rhythms, its demands. But even within busy lives, there are pockets of time that can be reclaimed. Not for productivity, but for presence. A quiet moment before speaking, a few breaths before replying. The decision to walk slowly, even when the schedule says to hurry. These choices are small, but they create space. And in that space, the experience of time softens. The brain begins to track not how much time is passing, but how it's being lived. And that distinction is important, because a day that feels full is not always the same as a day that is full. The feeling comes from attention, from variation, from meaning, not from the number of things completed. This is also why certain memories stay with us more than others. They were lived in fully, not rushed, not distracted. They unfolded at a pace that matched our ability to absorb them. And because of that, they remain vivid. The light in a room, the sound of a voice, the way time seemed to hold still for a few seconds. These moments don't always announce themselves as important, but later we find they've stayed. They've shaped how we remember that day, that season, even that year. Not because of what we did, but because of how time felt while we were doing it. And this is a quiet truth that often goes unnoticed, that the quality of time is more important than the quantity, that how time feels, heavy or light, rushed or spacious, can shape our entire perception of life. And that when we are given even a little space to feel time differently, something begins to heal. Not in the sense of fixing something broken, but in the sense of returning to something that was always there. A deeper rhythm, a quieter knowing, a more natural sense of when and how to move. This is not about withdrawing from the world. It's about living in it with more alignment, feeling when we are out of sync and gently adjusting, not to match an external timeline, but to find one that makes sense to us, to pause when needed, to rest when tired, to slow down not out of laziness but out of wisdom. Because time will always keep moving, that can't be changed. But how we move with it or against it, that is something we can feel, something we can shape, something we can return to moment by moment if we choose. There's something interesting about how we feel time during transitions. Those in-between moments, not quite where we were, not yet where we're going, tend to stretch. A train station platform, an airport terminal, waiting for results, sitting in a parked car after a long day. These moments don't demand action, but they hold a kind of emotional weight. Time slows down. Thoughts become louder. The body may be still, but the mind is active, often reviewing the past or rehearsing the future. The present feels strange, almost suspended. And yet, these moments are some of the clearest reminders of how time feels when it is no longer measured by tasks. In transitions, there is often nothing to do but wait, and that waiting reveals the raw texture of time, how slow or heavy it can feel when stripped of structure. This can be uncomfortable, but it's also revealing, because it shows how much of our experience of time depends on context. The same 10 minutes can feel unbearable or peaceful, depending on where we are, what we expect, and how much we allow ourselves to simply be. And often it's in these in-between places where the deeper parts of the mind begin to speak. Now, when we stop filling time, time begins to speak back. Not with words, but with sensation, with memory, with awareness. This may be one reason why time often feels different at night. When the world slows down, when the noise softens, and when there's no longer a schedule to chase, the perception of time changes. Minutes can stretch. Thoughts loop in new ways. The silence is thicker. We feel time not as movement, but as stillness. And depending on our state of mind, that stillness can feel either comforting or overwhelming. If we've spent the day suppressing emotion or avoiding thought, nighttime can feel like a flood. But if we've had space during the day to reflect, to slow down, to notice, then nighttime can feel like a soft landing, a quiet place to rest inside time rather than race through it. Sleep itself is a kind of surrender to time. We don't control its pace while dreaming. We lose the usual markers. Hours can pass without awareness. Events can unfold in seconds that feel like hours. The experience of time in dreams is fluid, untethered. And perhaps that's part of why sleep is so essential. It gives the brain time outside of measured time, a chance to reset its rhythms without needing to track, measure, or perform. The sleeping brain is still active, still processing, still learning, but in a different dimension of time, one that is internal, symbolic, and non-linear. And yet, so much of modern life makes sleep difficult. Not because we don't want to rest, but because the day never ends cleanly. The mental noise continues. The sense of time doesn't soften. The internal clock remains on alert, still trying to keep up with signals, still tracking what's unfinished. And in that state, sleep becomes another item on the list, something to achieve, something to manage. But rest doesn't respond well to management. It arrives when space is made for it, when time is allowed to widen, when the brain feels safe enough to stop tracking. This is why gentle routines, quiet evenings, and soft environments help. Not because they cause sleep directly, but because they shift the perception of time. They slow it down. They remove pressure. And in that pressureless space, the body begins to let go. This kind of letting go isn't a skill to master. It's a return, a remembering that we are not machines built to operate on fixed loops. We are living systems with cycles, fluctuations, and rhythms that don't always match the world around us. And when we try to force internal time to match external systems perfectly, we suffer. We become anxious, fatigued, disconnected. We forget how to feel where we are in time. We rely more and more on reminders, alarms, and calendars, not just to manage tasks, but to know who we are in a given moment. But there is always a way back. It starts not with changing everything, but with noticing. How does this moment feel? Not how long has it been, but how does it sit in the body? Is it fast, scattered, shallow, or slow, clear, steady? These questions don't require answers. They simply invite awareness. And with awareness, a choice becomes available, even in the smallest way, to shift the texture of time. Maybe it's standing up and stepping outside. Maybe it's letting silence fill a space instead of words. Maybe it's choosing to do one thing rather than three. These are not productivity tips. They are gestures of alignment. They are ways of inviting the nervous system back into a rhythm it can actually live inside. And over time, real time, not scheduled time, those small moments add up. The brain begins to recalibrate. It stops bracing for the next interruption. It begins to settle. And life, even with all its demands, begins to feel more coherent. Not because anything got easier, but because time became something we could feel again. Something we could live with, not against. Something that held us rather than rushed us forward. We don't always need more time. Sometimes we just need to change how we move through it. There's an interesting phenomenon that occurs when we lose track of time. Not in the sense of distraction or dissociation, but in moments of genuine absorption. When we are so fully engaged with something, and a task, a conversation, a quiet observation, that time seems to vanish. And these moments are often described as timeless, and yet they are some of the most deeply lived. We remember them not because they were long, but because we were fully inside them. The edges between past, present, and future blur, and what remains is a kind of still awareness. The mind stops asking what comes next. The body stops anticipating. There is only what is. This state, often called presence, isn't limited to any one activity. It can happen while cooking, or while listening to music, or while simply sitting near a window, watching light shift across a surface. It doesn't require silence or stillness, but it does require a kind of openness, a willingness to let time unfold without needing to manage it. And in that openness, the nervous system finds something it rarely gets: relief. Relief from measurement. Relief from comparison. Relief from the constant pressure to use time wisely. Because that phrase, use your time wisely, carries weight. It suggests that time is a resource and that worth is measured by what we do with it. But if we look closely, we might question the idea that time must always be used. What if time is not a commodity but a medium? Not something to spend, but something to inhabit? In this view, the question shifts. It's no longer, what did I accomplish today? But how did I exist within today? The answers may overlap, but the feeling is different. One is driven, the other is receptive, and receptivity is a quality modern time often leaves behind. To receive time as it comes and without rushing it, shaping it, or resisting it is a quiet skill. It's not passive, it's attentive in a different way. It notices without chasing. It listens without interruption. And the body responds to that shift. Heart rate slows, breath deepens, muscles unclench. These are not dramatic changes, but they signal something fundamental, that the system is no longer under threat. It no longer needs to guard against the future. This is part of why certain environments, forests, oceans, mountains, seem to restore us so deeply. It's not just beauty, it's pacing. Nature doesn't rush. It follows cycles far older than us. The wind doesn't arrive on a schedule. Light doesn't flicker in response to urgency. These places reintroduce us to a form of time that is spacious and indifferent to our plans. And in that indifference, we are relieved of pressure. We're reminded that we are part of a larger rhythm. Not the center of it, not outside it, but inside it as a participant, not a manager. Of course, we can't always live inside those environments, but we can learn from them. We can let their rhythms inform our own. Not in every moment, but in some. We can give ourselves permission to move more slowly, to let a moment breathe before responding, to pause without explanation, to end the day not with one more check of the to-do list, but with a quiet acknowledgement that this day, like all days, will soon become memory. And memory, too, is shaped by time's texture. Fast, compressed days often leave faint traces. Slow, reflective ones leave deeper marks. This is not about doing more, it's about feeling more. And often we don't need more experiences to feel fulfilled. We need more space around the ones we already have. Space to notice, to reflect, to absorb. When we rush from one thing to the next, the brain doesn't have time to integrate. It stores fragments instead of narratives. And over time, those fragments feel like a blur. But when we widen the frame, when we give ourselves space to feel time fully, something changes. Moments begin to hold meaning again. The small things, a gesture, a phrase, a breath, start to carry weight. Not because they're dramatic, but because we are present enough to notice them. And this presence, this attentiveness becomes the thread that ties our days together. It becomes memory, it becomes selfhood, it becomes a life that is not only lived, but deeply felt. And perhaps this is one of the most important shifts we can make. Not to have more time or to use it more efficiently, but to feel that the time we have is enough. When lived fully, calmly, attentively, that time, when allowed to be what it is, carries us in ways we often forget. That we do not have to chase it, that we can rest within it, that even as it moves forward, we are not being left behind. We are simply moving with it, in quiet rhythm, one moment at a time. There's a curious kind of distortion that happens when we look back at time, especially after periods of high stress or major transition. The memory compresses. We remember the start, we remember the end, but the middle becomes blurry. The days run together, the details fade. Sometimes we even forget how much we endured or accomplished because it all felt like survival. And yet during those periods, time often felt long, stretched, heavy. Every hour was noticeable. Every task required effort. But afterward, that weight seems to disappear, and we're left with a strange sense of having lost time. Not because we didn't live it, but because we couldn't fully absorb it while it was happening. This kind of temporal blurring is not a flaw. It's part of how the brain protects itself. When we are overwhelmed, the mind narrows its focus. It prioritizes getting through the moment, not storing it. And so the internal timeline becomes fragmented. We look back and struggle to explain how weeks passed, even though we were busy every day. And this can lead to a subtle sense of disorientation, as if our lives are moving faster than we can track, as if we are aging without fully remembering how we got here. These feelings are more common than we tend to admit. And they don't come from carelessness. They come from compression. Compression of time happens whenever our mental space is filled beyond capacity. Too many tasks, too many demands, too little reflection. The days shrink not in reality, but in memory. And to counter that, we need not do more, but feel more. We need to allow time to expand again, not by changing the clock, but by changing how we move through it, by pausing, by noticing, by letting even a small part of the day unfold without rush. Because when we do, that part of the day becomes anchored. It stays with us. It shapes how we remember this time in our lives. It's often in these slower stretches, moments of stillness or repetition or simplicity, that we begin to feel time differently. A long walk with no destination. A quiet afternoon doing something familiar, a weekend without plans. These moments don't announce themselves as important, but they create space for integration. The mind catches up with itself. Emotion has time to surface. Thoughts complete their loops. And the nervous system has a chance to downshift from the high alert that so much of modern time demands. Interestingly, these are also the moments when creativity tends to return, not just in artistic work, but in the basic sense of openness, the ability to see options, make connections, imagine new directions. Creativity requires room. It cannot be forced into a corner, and compressed time, by its very nature, leaves little space for this kind of mental expansion. So when we live in a state of constant urgency, it's not surprising that our ideas feel stuck, our motivation feels low, our sense of possibility narrows. We're not broken. We're just out of rhythm. The same applies to relationships. Connection doesn't thrive in hurried time. It deepens in slowness, in the unmeasured parts of the day, when there's time for silence between words, time to look at each other fully, time to listen without needing to respond immediately. These are the moments that build trust, not because of what is said, but because of how time is shared. When two people are present together in time, not rushing, not distracted, something very simple and human takes place. The nervous systems attune, the rhythm stabilizes, and in that stability, connection deepens. This may be why some of our strongest memories with others are quiet ones. Sitting together, sharing a meal, being near each other in companionable silence. These moments are not flashy. They don't always make stories, but they leave marks. They become part of how we feel time in relation to others. And when we look back, it's often these simple, spacious moments that feel the most real, the most alive, the most ours. But in the rush of daily life, these moments are easy to overlook. We might believe the quality time has to be planned, has to be special, has to be earned after everything else is done. But presence doesn't wait for permission. It arrives when we let go of measuring. When we stop thinking of time as something to maximize and begin to see it as something to inhabit. Even for a minute, even within a busy schedule, even in the middle of everything else, it's not about removing structure entirely. Structure can be supportive. It helps us navigate, but structure without space becomes rigid, and time without feeling becomes flat. What we need is a balance, a way to hold time gently, to allow it to breathe, to bend, to unfold naturally. This doesn't mean slowing everything down. It means slowing something down. Even briefly, a moment in the morning, a pause before speaking, a breath between activities. These small acts recalibrate us. They bring us back into contact with the present. And the present, when felt fully, always reshapes the past and softens the future. Because the present is the only place we truly feel time. Not as a countdown, not as a schedule, but as a sensation, almost, of being here in this moment, with this breath, with this awareness. And in that sensation, time begins to return to its natural shape. Not a straight line, but a wave. Not a container to be filled, but a flow to be joined. Not something we control, but something we accompany. Gently, curiously, without demand. There is something subtle that happens when we begin to treat time not as something to use, but as something to notice. The experience of a single hour can shift entirely depending on how we hold it. If we enter it with pressure, the hour becomes narrow, brittle, easily broken by interruptions. But if we enter it with openness, the same hour can feel wide, stable, and quietly nourishing. Nothing external needs to change, just the way we relate to the time we're in. This shift in attitude is small, but its effect is not. Because how we feel in time is often more important than how much of it we have. People often speak of being short on time, and the phrase is revealing. It suggests time as a resource, something that can run out, something that must be managed carefully, something that is always slipping away. And in a world of deadlines and constant motion, this framing makes sense, but it also carries tension. If time is something we're always running out of, then life becomes a series of negotiations, trading one task for another, 1 hour for another, one goal for another. Always hoping we've chosen wisely, but never quite sure. This kind of relationship with time creates anxiety even in rest. When we pause, we wonder if we should be doing more. When we finish a task, we think immediately of the next. Even joy becomes thin because it's haunted by a sense of something else we should be doing. And over time, the mind learns that stillness equals failure, that unstructured moments are dangerous, that rest is only allowed when it is earned, and even then, not for long. But the body remembers something different. It remembers what it's like to move slowly, to wait without impatience, to listen without preparing a response. These states are not lazy. They are foundational. They are the conditions in which the nervous system repairs itself, in which the mind clears, in which attention sharpens. And when we deny ourselves access to these states, by compressing time into endless action, we slowly begin to erode our own capacity to function well. Not because we're weak, but because we're not machines. And time, as experienced by a living system, is not mechanical. This is one of the quiet truths often missed in conversations about productivity, that we do not become more efficient by speeding up endlessly. There is a ceiling to compression. Beyond a certain point, rushing creates waste, not just in energy, but in clarity. Mistakes happen, attention slips, emotion builds up in unseen ways, and eventually the system starts to signal distress, in forgetfulness, in irritability, in fatigue that sleep alone can't fix. These are not failures. They are warnings. Messages from a deeper layer of the mind that something is out of sync. And that something is often time itself, or more accurately, our relationship with it. When time becomes only a measure of output, we begin to disconnect from meaning. We do more but feel less. We move faster but arrive nowhere. We speak more but connect less. And life becomes a blur of motion with very few places to rest. But when we allow ourselves to feel time differently, when we reintroduce space, quiet, rhythm, meaning begins to return. Not all at once and not always clearly, but gradually, like warmth, returning to a cold hand, slowly, gently, without force. This process doesn't need to be perfect. There is no ideal schedule, no flawless routine. It's not about control, it's about sensitivity. The ability to feel when we are moving too fast and when we are ready to slow. The ability to recognize not just what needs to be done, but what kind of time it needs. Some tasks require energy, precision, momentum. Others require softness, patience, and drift. And the more we learn to match the task to the tempo, the more life begins to feel like something we are part of, not something we are pushing against. This isn't always easy, especially in cultures that prize speed and constant availability. But even within these structures, there are choices. We can soften how we transition between moments. We can allow silence to exist inside conversations. We can treat the beginning and end of the day not as bookends, but as thresholds, places to pause, to sense, to realign. These are not grand changes, but they shift the shape of time. They make it feel more like a landscape than a hallway, something to walk through, to explore, to experience, rather than something to rush across as fast as possible. And over time, these small adjustments begin to have an effect. They change how memory forms. They change how emotion moves. They change how we sleep, how we relate, how we think. Not because we've mastered time, but because we've stopped fighting it. We've begun, in quiet ways, to live inside it again. One of the most noticeable shifts that happens when we begin to live inside time again is a softening of internal pressure. That tightness we sometimes feel, the subtle urgency, the invisible checklist always running in the background. It begins to ease. Not disappear entirely, but lose its grip. The mind starts to recognize that not every moment must be useful in a measurable way. That existing simply and quietly is not a waste of time. It is time experienced directly. And that realization can be quietly profound. Because much of what creates mental exhaustion isn't physical effort. It's the ongoing pressure to justify our time. The feeling that every hour must be defended, that we must prove, even to ourselves, that we are not falling behind. But behind what? That question, when asked gently, often reveals something. that the sense of urgency we feel is often vague, shaped more by comparison than reality, more by what others seem to be doing than by what we truly need. And this externalization of time, this constant measuring of ourselves against others, removes us from our own rhythm. It makes it harder to hear the quieter signals, the ones that say you need rest, or this can wait, or even this matters more than you thought. These signals don't shout. They arrive softly. They are subtle. And when time is too loud, they get lost. This is part of why slowing down isn't just about pace. It's about perception. When we slow our experience of time, the volume of external pressure lowers, and the internal voice becomes clearer. Not always comfortable, but clearer. And with that clarity comes a new kind of intelligence. Not the kind that moves fast and solves problems quickly, but the kind that senses patterns, that notices changes in mood, that recalls forgotten intentions, that connects current experience to long-term values. This kind of awareness takes time. Not more time in the day, but more presence in the moment. And when it's there, decisions feel different, less reactive, more aligned, more in tune with something stable underneath the noise. Even the way we approach future planning changes when our perception of time shifts. Instead of racing toward imagined milestones, we begin to ask deeper questions. What do I want this season of my life to feel like? What kind of rhythm do I want to build into my weeks? What kind of time do I want to offer the people I care about? These are not questions of efficiency. They are questions of meaning. They don't always have clear answers, but they redirect attention away from urgency and toward depth. And when we live from that place, even occasionally, the experience of time becomes less fragile. It stops slipping through our fingers quite so easily because we're no longer trying to hold on to every second. We're simply being with it, moment by moment, without grasping. This doesn't eliminate distraction or stress, but it creates more room around them. So they don't consume the entire landscape. They become part of the rhythm, not the whole story. Sleep, too, responds to this softening. The nervous system quiets more easily when time isn't being treated like a contest. When there is no race to win, no urgency to overcome, just the simple unfolding of another evening, another end to another day, arriving like a slow tide, asking nothing. It's not always easy to accept that kind of stillness, especially when the mind has been trained to fill every gap. But with practice, stillness becomes less threatening. And in that stillness, the brain finds a kind of repair that no task can provide. Even our dreams change when we shift how we feel time. They become more integrated, less chaotic, more like stories and less like noise. Because dreams are the mind's way of processing emotion, memory, and experience, all things that require space. When we crowd our waking hours too tightly, dreams carry the overflow. But when waking life allows room for reflection, dreams become gentler. They carry insight instead of overload. This is why for some people, even a single day spent slowly, without screens, without noise, without pressure, can feel like a return, not just to rest, but to self. It's not about retreating from life, it's about re-entering it from a different angle, one where time is no longer something to battle, but something to share space with, something to walk beside rather than outrun. And the more we practice that, even in small ways, the more natural it begins to feel. We stop measuring every outcome. We stop asking if we've done enough. we start asking different questions entirely. Questions like, did I notice anything today? Was there a moment that felt real? Did I offer time to something that matters? These aren't questions of productivity. They are questions of presence. And over time, they reshape not only how we live, but how we remember living. Because when we look back, what we often remember most vividly are not the rushed days, but the spacious ones. Not the completed tasks, but the quiet connections. The meal that wasn't hurried. The conversation that lingered. The moment of watching something small, light on water, a shadow on the wall, wind moving through leaves, and feeling for just a second, entirely present in time. Those are the moments that stay. There's something deeply human about the way we search for patterns in time. We look for beginnings and endings. We mark birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. We count how long it's been since something started or since something ended. We create cycles, weekly routines, monthly goals, yearly reflections. Even when time flows continuously, we divide it into pieces so we can understand it, so we can make meaning from it. Because without markers, time can feel endless, shapeless. And while freedom can be beautiful, it can also be disorienting, especially for the mind which thrives on rhythm and reference. That's why rituals, even small ones, are so grounding. A morning coffee in silence, a walk at the same time each day, a quiet moment before sleep. These acts are not about productivity, they're about orientation. They give the brain something to hold on to, a stable point in the flow of hours. And from that point, everything else becomes easier to navigate. Not because the world changes, but because we are more rooted in it. It's also why disruptions to routine, even small ones, can make time feel strange. A single sleepless night can stretch a day into something heavy and formless. A shift in schedule can make the week feel longer or shorter than expected. The structure we use to hold time is delicate. When it bends, our perception bends with it. And the more tightly we try to control time, the more we notice when it slips out of our grip. But some of the most meaningful experiences happen when time is not tightly held, when it flows more naturally, a day without plans, a long conversation that drifts into the evening, an unexpected moment of stillness. These experiences often stay with us, even if they weren't planned, because they let us feel time as something other than a resource. They let us feel it as a space, a place to dwell, a place to be. This feeling of dwelling in time rather than managing it brings a kind of quiet confidence. It tells the nervous system that there is no need to hurry, that life is not a series of tests. That meaning is not always found in action. Sometimes it's found in attention, in simply being where we are, as we are, without pressure to move forward. And from that place, even challenging moments become more bearable. Because when we're not rushing to escape a feeling, we can meet it with more steadiness. We can sit with discomfort without amplifying it. We can listen to what it has to say. Often, it's not the emotion itself that overwhelms us. It's the pressure to move through it quickly, to fix it, to be done with it. But emotions, like time, have their own rhythm. They arrive when they arrive. They pass when they pass. And the more we allow them the time they need, the more they tend to soften on their own. This kind of patience is difficult to practice in a world that moves quickly, a world that values decisiveness, speed, output. But when we learn to trust slower time, to rest in the unfolding, we gain something subtle but profound. We gain the ability to stay present, even when things are unclear, even when answers haven't arrived, even when we don't know what's next. And this presence becomes a kind of anchor, not a rigid one, but a flexible one. It allows us to move with life's changes without feeling lost. It allows us to wait without feeling stuck. It allows us to pause without guilt. Because we are no longer measuring our value by how quickly we move. We are allowing ourselves to be shaped by time, rather than trying to shape it entirely on our own. That shift from control to collaboration changes everything. It brings relief. It brings spaciousness. It brings a sense of being held by something larger than our plans. And from that place, we can begin to move more freely. We can act when needed, but rest when possible. We can create without pressure. We can listen without interruption. We can live not just in time, but with it. And in that witness, something very old and very familiar begins to return. A sense of rhythm, a feeling of being part of something. Not as a concept, but as a sensation. A slow, steady awareness that this moment and this one right now is enough. Not because it is perfect, but because it is real. Because we are in it, because it is ours. As we begin to live more gently with time, we may start to notice something else. That not all forms of stillness are the same. There is the stillness that comes from waiting, and the stillness that comes from presence. One feels tense, expectant, slightly suspended. The other feels quiet, grounded, full in its own way. The first is about what hasn't yet arrived. The second is about what's already here. And although they may look similar from the outside, their effect on the body and the mind is entirely different. Waiting stretches time in a particular way. It places our awareness in the future, just slightly ahead of the moment. We may feel restless or alert or mildly anxious. Even if what we're waiting for is small, the mind begins to prepare. It loops. It anticipates. And in doing so, it leaves the present moment less inhabited. This is normal. We all wait. But when waiting becomes the dominant mode of time, always looking forward, always planning the next step, something begins to wear down. Because the present stops being a place to live and becomes just a bridge to somewhere else. But presence, true presence, does the opposite. It settles the mind back into the now, not through force, but through attention, through noticing. The weight of the chair, the sound of distant traffic, the breath slow and steady without needing to be controlled. In presence, time stops stretching. It returns to its natural shape. The moment becomes enough, not because it contains something exciting, but because it contains everything. And in that fullness, the nervous system begins to trust again. It doesn't need to prepare. It doesn't need to escape. It can just be. This kind of presence isn't a task. It's not a skill to perfect. It's a relationship, one that deepens the more we visit it. Some days it arrives easily, other days not at all. But the invitation is always there. Not in silence alone, but in movement too. Washing dishes, walking without a destination, listening to a familiar voice. Presence can live anywhere. What matters is not what we're doing, but how we're moving through it, with tension or with openness, with urgency or with softness. Over time, these moments of presence begin to reshape the story we carry about time. We stop thinking of it as a container to be filled and start feeling it as a companion, something that walks with us at our side, never demanding more than we have to give. And from this companionship, a kind of resilience begins to grow. Not the resilience of pushing through, but the resilience of remaining present, of meeting life gently without flinching, even when it's uncertain. This shift also changes how we think about rest. Rest is no longer a reward for hard work, but a rhythm we move in and out of, like breathing, like sleep, like the seasons. It becomes part of life, not separate from it. And in that change, rest becomes easier. We don't need to earn it. We don't need to justify it. We simply recognize it as necessary, just as something the body already knows how to do if given the chance. And so the day begins to soften. The edges between doing and being become less sharp. We stop swinging between extremes, overwork and collapse, and begin to find something steadier. A gentle pacing, a permission to pause, a sense that our value is not measured in speed but in presence. And this presence does something else too. It allows us to remember not just events, but how they felt. We remember the texture of time, the light in a room, the way a certain hour moved more slowly than the rest. These are not big memories, but they are anchoring. They help us feel like we've truly lived, not just passed through. They help us feel that we've occupied our own lives fully, even if quietly, even if nothing remarkable happened. This is not about slowing down for the sake of it. It's about recovering our relationship with time, letting it stretch and settle in a way that matches what we are. Living beings, not clocks, not engines, not algorithms, just people moving through days that don't always make sense, doing the best we can to feel what's real. And what's real is rarely fast. It rarely demands. It waits, it lingers, it invites. And when we're ready, we meet it. Not all at once, not every time, but enough to remember that we were never meant to feel time as pressure. We were meant to feel it as presence. When we begin to feel time as presence rather than pressure, something else becomes possible. We begin to listen differently, not just to others, but to ourselves. The quieter parts of the mind, the subtle sensations of the body, the faint undercurrents of thought that usually go unnoticed, these begin to surface, not as distractions, but as signals, messages that were always there, just waiting for a little space to be heard, because time that is too full leaves no room for reflection. But time that breathes allows meaning to unfold slowly, without needing to be forced. And reflection, gentle and unhurried, is one of the ways we make sense of experience. It's how the brain integrates what's happened. Not through analysis or judgment, but through quiet noticing, a memory that drifts in, a realization that wasn't there before, an emotion that softens once it's allowed to be felt. These moments don't arrive on command. They arrive when there's enough stillness to hold them, when the system feels safe enough to open, when we're not rushing toward what's next. This may be why some of the clearest thinking happens in ordinary moments, while folding laundry or walking alone or sitting quietly with a warm drink. These activities don't demand much, and because of that, the mind relaxes, it wanders a little. And in that wandering, connections are made, not planned ones, not forced ones, but gentle, surprising links between parts of experience that had remained separate. This is what reflection really is. Not remembering perfectly, but allowing the past and present to touch, to speak to each other. When we crowd time with constant input, we lose this capacity. Even if we're learning or absorbing useful information, it is nowhere to settle. It remains surface level. Useful for a moment maybe, but easily forgotten. Because true learning, when the kind that becomes part of us, requires space. It needs gaps, silence, repetition, time to sink in. This is not inefficiency, it's how memory works. It's how meaning grows. Not quickly, but steadily, layer by layer. This is also why rest is not the opposite of progress. It's part of it. Rest allows the deeper layers of thought to organize themselves. It creates room for things to fall into place. We may think nothing is happening, but under the surface, integration is occurring. The nervous system resets, attention recharges, emotional responses become less reactive, and the sense of self begins to feel whole again, not scattered across a dozen tabs or tasks, but gathered, centered, quietly present. And when we return from that rest, we often find ourselves clearer. Not always energized, not always inspired, but more coherent, more aligned, as if the internal timeline has caught up with itself. This is a gentle kind of progress. It doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but it's real, and it's sustainable, because it respects the rhythms that actually govern our lives, rhythms that cannot be compressed without cost. That cost shows up in subtle ways, in forgetfulness, in irritability, in the inability to feel joy even when good things are happening, in the sense that time is slipping by too quickly and that we're somehow missing it. These are not signs that we need to do more. They are signs that we need to feel more. That time as we've been living it has become too thin to hold us. That it's time to step back into a pace we can actually live inside. This doesn't mean abandoning structure. It means softening it, letting it hold us, not bind us, creating boundaries that allow flow, not rigidity, giving ourselves permission to linger, to repeat, to pause, to not always know what comes next. Because life, in its truest form, rarely follows a perfect schedule. It loops, it delays, it circles back, it surprises. And time, when we let it move naturally, reflects that. It becomes a medium through which we experience change, not a ruler by which we measure failure. And in this gentler relationship with time, we begin to trust something beyond the clock. We trust that things will unfold, even if not on our preferred timeline. That clarity will come, even if not immediately. That we can be here, now, even if here isn't perfect. This trust is not passive. It's active in its own way. It takes presence. It takes noticing. It takes letting go of control long enough to feel the current beneath the surface. The deeper flow of time that has nothing to do with minutes or hours, but everything to do with being alive. And in that flow, we find ourselves again, not in the rush, not in the pressure, but in the quiet rhythm of being here, simply and fully for as long as we are. Over time, this return to presence begins to shape not only how we feel each day, but how we imagine the future. When we live inside compressed, pressured time, the future often feels like a demand, a list of expectations, a moving target we're always trying to prepare for. But when we slow down enough to feel time as something lived, rather than something chased, the future softens. It becomes less of a burden and more of an openness, a space that hasn't yet been filled, a place we might grow into, rather than something we must conquer. This doesn't mean giving up on plans or ambition. It means approaching them differently. Not as a race against time, but as a dance with it. Recognizing that not all steps are forward, that detours are not always delays, that sometimes the most important parts of our lives emerge in the spaces between plans, in the pauses, in the moments we didn't schedule, but that stayed with us anyway. This mindset creates a kind of resilience that isn't about pushing through. It's about remaining present, even when things don't move as expected. Because when time is experienced gently, we become more adaptable, more patient, more willing to let life unfold in its own way. And that unfolding often brings what we couldn't have anticipated: new perspectives, unexpected connections, quiet joys that don't announce themselves but quietly change us over time. It also becomes easier to forgive ourselves for the time we think we've lost. The weeks that blurred, the days that felt wasted, the years that didn't go as planned. From the outside, those times might look empty, but when viewed with softness, they often held something invisible: rest we didn't know we needed, lessons we couldn't yet name, shifts that were happening beneath the surface. Not all time is visible. Not all growth is immediate. And when we stop measuring every stretch of time by its output, we begin to honor the hidden work that happens in quiet seasons. This changes how we relate to others too. We stop expecting people to move at our pace. We give them time to arrive in their own rhythm. We stop pushing conversations toward resolution. We allow pauses to exist. We give space to emotion. We begin to understand that presence isn't just a gift we offer ourselves. It's a gift we offer those around us. And when shared, that presence becomes a kind of language. A way of saying, I'm here, I'm not rushing you. This moment matters, even if it's silent, even if it's uncertain. In a world that moves quickly, this kind of shared presence can feel radical, but it's also deeply familiar. We've all felt it in the moments that slowed down naturally without effort. Moments with loved ones, moments in nature, moments when time seemed to hold still just long enough for us to fully arrive. These are the moments that shape us, not just because of what happened, but because of how we felt in them, fully awake, fully here, not ahead, not behind, just present. And maybe that's what we're really seeking when we say we want more time. Maybe we're not looking for longer days or fewer responsibilities or even better balance. Maybe we're longing to feel time again, to know that we're truly inside it, that we haven't lost ourselves in the rush, that life is still happening, not just around us, but within us, and that we're allowed to feel it. That kind of time doesn't require a perfect routine or an empty schedule. It just asks for a little room, a little attention, a few moments here and there where we don't measure, we just notice, where we don't control, we just follow, where we don't rush, we just stay. These moments may be small, but they're powerful. They reintroduce us to ourselves. They remind us that time, when felt gently, becomes something entirely different. Not a race, not a countdown, but a companion. Quiet, steady, always with us, asking only that we stay close enough to feel it move. This feeling of staying close to time, of walking beside it rather than chasing it, creates a kind of steadiness that doesn't depend on circumstance. It allows us to move through change without losing our sense of orientation. Because when time is not rushed, even change feels different. It becomes something we can meet slowly, something we can explore rather than resist. There's room to feel uncertain. There's time to let go gradually. There's space for something new to arrive without needing to be immediately understood. We often think of change as something that happens suddenly, but in reality, most change is slow. It unfolds in small shifts, subtle adjustments, thoughts we didn't used to have, feelings that linger a little longer than before, habits that fade without force. This kind of change needs gentle time, not tight deadlines or immediate transformation, but space to experiment, to stumble and begin again, to rest between efforts. And when we allow that space, we find ourselves growing in ways we didn't expect, not toward an image of who we think we should be, but into who we actually are. This idea that time is not just something we use, but something that shapes us, becomes clearer the more we observe our own cycles. Our need for rest, our need for connection, our need to pause and make meaning before moving forward. These needs don't go away just because the world is busy. They just go unmet. And unmet needs don't disappear. They wait, quietly, often patiently, until we are ready to notice them again. Sometimes they show up in unexpected ways. A restlessness that won't settle. A sadness we can't name. A difficulty focusing that seems to come out of nowhere. And while there are many reasons these things happen, one of them is often this: we've lost touch with time as something we can feel. It's become an external framework again, something to keep up with, something that moves faster than we do, and the body, always honest, begins to signal that something's off. But these signals are not problems. They're reminders. They're invitations to return, to recalibrate, to begin again, not with a new strategy, but with a new rhythm. One that matches the truth of where we are, not the idea of where we should be. This rhythm may not be the same every day. Some days move quickly, some don't move much at all. But that variation is not a flaw. It's a sign of life. A sign that we are responding, adapting, evolving in real time. This is how nature moves too. Not in constant motion, but in cycles. Growth, stillness, release, renewal. Seasons that blend into one another without sharp edges. Light that shifts slowly over the course of a day. Trees that shed leaves. Not because they've failed, but because that's what the season requires. There's no rush, no guilt, just participation in a larger rhythm. And we are not separate from that. We are part of it, even if we've forgotten. To remember this is not to retreat from responsibility, it's to re-enter responsibility with more clarity, with more presence, with more capacity. Because when we live in alignment with time, not as a system of control, but as a rhythm we belong to, we become more able to meet what life asks of us, not from depletion, but from groundedness, not with urgency, but with steadiness. We begin to make choices that feel congruent with who we are, rather than who we think we're supposed to be, and perhaps most quietly of all, we begin to feel less afraid of time passing, less worried about running out of it. Because when we are truly present in the time we have, it no longer feels like something slipping away. It feels like something we're inside of, something we're held by. And even if it moves on, which it always does, we are not left behind. We are carried. We are part of the movement, not outside of it. And that realization, when felt deeply, is one of the most calming truths there is. There's a certain peace that comes when we stop trying to outpace time, when we stop imagining that life will begin once we reach the next milestone, once the schedule is under control, once the inbox is empty, once everything finally settles. That imagined moment where everything is finished and we can finally relax is often just out of reach. And even when we do arrive at it, it tends to dissolve quickly. Another task appears, another responsibility surfaces, and so we keep moving. We keep delaying the feeling of presence, the sense of being allowed to be here, now, without needing to earn it first. But what if that sense of arrival isn't tied to achievement at all? What if it's something we can step into at any moment simply by letting go of the idea that there's somewhere else we need to be? This shift is subtle. It doesn't require changing the structure of the day. It doesn't require removing responsibilities. It only asks that we release the belief that time must always be directed toward progress, that every minute must justify itself by leading to something more. Of course, we still care about goals. We still make plans. But they don't need to dominate every thought. They don't need to close off our capacity to be present in the midst of what's unfolding. Because sometimes the most meaningful moments aren't the ones we plan for. They're the ones that emerge quietly. A glance, a pause, a breath, a moment of noticing something we've passed 100 times before but never really seen. These small experiences often hold more presence than any finished task. And presence, once felt, becomes its own kind of anchor. It doesn't stop the day from moving forward, but it gives us something stable to return to, a center point, a quiet reminder that we are already inside our lives, not preparing for them, not chasing after them, but living them, breath by breath, step by step. This kind of awareness doesn't need to be constant. It only needs to be remembered. And every time we remember it, time softens. The pressure eases. The moment opens. This also changes the way we experience endings. So often the passage of time brings with it a sense of loss, not just the big milestones, but the small transitions. The last day of a season, the end of a conversation. The quiet moment when something familiar is no longer there. And it can be tempting to rush past these endings to fill the space they leave behind. But when we slow down enough to feel them, really feel them, we often find that they hold something meaningful, a chance to acknowledge what mattered, a chance to notice what changed, a chance to carry something forward, even as we let go. Because letting go isn't about forgetting, it's about making room. And when time is not rushed, letting go becomes less painful. There's space to feel the shift, space to honor it, space to trust that what is gone has made its mark and that something new will come. Not because we force it, but because life continues to unfold. Time continues to move. And we are still inside it, still part of it, still able to notice the beauty of what remains. That noticing, quiet, patient, without demand, is one of the most powerful ways we participate in time. It doesn't require reflection in the traditional sense. It doesn't require words. It just requires attention. A soft gaze toward the present. A willingness to see without rushing toward interpretation. And in that seeing, time becomes visible again. Not as a schedule, not as a weight, but as a living, changing field that we're allowed to move through slowly, openly, without needing to prove anything at all. In that open movement through time, we often rediscover something we've known all along, that the pace of the body is slower than the pace of the world. The heart beats steadily, not urgently. The breath flows in and out without rushing. Muscles tighten and release in their own rhythm, not according to the clock. And when we begin to align with that natural rhythm, something quiet inside us settles. The body feels listened to. The nervous system stops bracing. We begin to occupy our own physical presence more fully, not just as a tool for doing, but as a space for being. This reconnection with the body isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as pausing long enough to feel where your feet are, or noticing how your shoulders rise when you're concentrating, or sensing the difference between a deep breath and a shallow one. These small points of contact with the present are not distractions from life. They are life. They are the places where time and awareness meet. And when we tune into them, time becomes something we can inhabit again, not just observe from a distance. It's easy to forget this, especially when so much of life takes place in abstract space, on screens and thoughts and future plans and digital conversations. We can spend entire days without fully landing in our bodies, without remembering that we are physical beings, moving through physical space, shaped by gravity, breath, temperature, light. But the body never forgets. It carries the tension of rushed time. It holds the signals we ignore. And it's often the first to notice when something isn't right. When we're out of rhythm, out of sync, out of presence. When we give it space, the body offers clarity, not in words, but in sensation. A tightness that says we need to rest. A heaviness that invites stillness. A calm that tells us we're safe. These messages are easy to miss when we're moving quickly, but in slower time they become more available. And listening to them doesn't mean stopping everything. It simply means allowing our movement through time to be informed by something deeper than expectation, by something honest and embodied. This honesty is what brings us back into rhythm. Not a perfect schedule, but a felt sense of timing. Knowing when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to listen, when to begin and when to pause. These decisions are not always intellectual. They arise naturally when we are connected to the moment, when we are not overriding our own signals in the name of efficiency. And while this kind of timing may look slower from the outside, it often leads to more meaningful action because it's not driven by habit or pressure, but by a quiet inner knowing that emerges when time is lived, not forced. Living time in this way also changes how we experience transitions between moments. Instead of rushing from one thing to the next, we begin to notice the in-between spaces. The breath before we open a door, the silence after a conversation ends, the pause between reading one message and replying to it. These spaces are small, but they matter. They are where integration happens, where the mind catches up, where emotion finds its shape. And when we fill them too quickly, we lose that chance. So much of feeling lost in time comes from losing these transitions. Days blend together because we've removed the edges. Everything becomes one long stream of input and response. But when we reintroduce even the smallest of pauses, time begins to feel shaped again, contained, held, not tight, not rigid, but whole. We start to recognize the shape of our days. We feel where they begin and end. And in that recognition, a sense of continuity returns, a sense of being part of something unfolding rather than something slipping away. We may still be busy, we may still have responsibilities, but now we are moving through them with more awareness, more softness, more choice. We're not being pulled through time by force, we're walking through it with attention. And in that walking, we become part of a rhythm that's older than any schedule. The rhythm of being human. The rhythm of living. The rhythm of time, felt fully and freely as it moves with us and through us, one quiet moment at a time. There's something deeply reassuring about returning to that rhythm. The sense that even when the world moves fast, we don't always have to. That time can still feel spacious, even in the middle of responsibility. That presence doesn't require perfect conditions. It just requires a little willingness, a little noticing, a small shift in how we relate to the moment we're already in. This shift becomes easier the more we practice it. At first, the mind may resist. It may keep reaching for the next thing, the next answer, the next distraction. That's not failure, that's habit. A deeply learned rhythm shaped by years of fast time. The goal is not to silence the mind or escape thought. The goal is simply to notice and to choose, now and then, not to follow. To pause instead, to feel instead, to stay, even for just a breath, with what is. Sometimes all it takes is one deep inhale, held a little longer than usual. Not to control the breath, but to remember that it's happening. To remember that we're here, that we're in a body, in a moment in time, and that this moment, the one we're already in, doesn't need to be improved. It just needs to be felt. It doesn't have to be turned into something. It can just exist as it is, and we can exist inside it without needing to rush it along. This becomes especially important in moments that feel uncertain, when the future is unclear, or when something has ended but the next thing hasn't yet begun. These are the kinds of spaces that fast time tries to skip, but slow time knows how to hold them. It doesn't demand resolution. It doesn't ask for a plan. It simply makes room for the experience to unfold, for feelings to move through, for thoughts to rise and fall, for clarity to arrive in its own time, not ours. And when we stop rushing through uncertainty, we often discover that it isn't empty. It's full of information, full of shifts happening just beneath the surface, full of signals that can guide us, but only if we're quiet enough to hear them. This is how intuition speaks. Not in flashes, but in waves, in slow currents, in feelings that take time to recognize. When we make space for those currents, we begin to navigate from a different place. Not from urgency, but from resonance. Not from fear, but from something deeper. It's a kind of knowing that isn't always easy to explain. It doesn't always arrive with clarity, but it's felt. And when we follow it, something aligns. Life doesn't get simpler, but it becomes more coherent, more connected, more meaningful. Not because everything makes sense, but because we are fully participating, not just reacting to time, but inhabiting it. This is the quiet power of slow presence. It brings us back into relationship with time, and through that, back into relationship with ourselves, with our own rhythms, our own needs, our own voice. A voice that often gets drowned out by the noise of fast time, by the pressure to perform, to respond, to always keep going. But when we let time stretch again, that voice grows louder. And it's rarely critical. It's rarely harsh. It's often gentle, almost fragile. It says things like, "You're tired," or "You've done enough for now," or simply, "You're allowed to be here." And we're allowed to be here. Not just when everything is done, not just when we've earned it, but always. Because presence is not a reward, it's a right. A natural state we return to, again and again. Every time we remember that we're not behind, we're not late, we're not being measured. We're just here, in a body, in a moment, in the quiet unfolding of time. That unfolding doesn't ask for anything. It doesn't hurry. It doesn't judge. It simply continues. And we, if we choose, can continue with it gently, attentively, with less force and more trust. Trust in the rhythm of time as it moves, not ahead of us or behind us, but around us, with us, through us. Always here, always now, always waiting to be felt again. As we move with that rhythm, the quiet, unfolding rhythm of time, felt rather than measured, a subtle transformation begins to take place. The edges of the day become softer. Transitions feel less jarring. Even small tasks begin to carry a different weight. They no longer exist only to be completed and moved on from. They become part of the texture of life itself. Not background noise, but a kind of quiet presence. We can rest inside, washing a dish, folding a sweater, listening to the wind outside. These aren't moments we usually remember, but when we inhabit them fully, they become part of a larger pattern, a way of being in time that isn't driven by novelty or stimulation, but by noticing, by care. And in that noticing, the moment expands, not into something dramatic or extraordinary, but into something complete, whole, enough. And that sense of enoughness, when it arises, is one of the clearest signs that our relationship with time is healing. Because the feeling of never having enough time, of always running out, always being behind, isn't just a result of having too much to do. It's also a result of being too far removed from the moment we're in. The farther we drift from presence, the more time feels like something slipping through our fingers. But when we return, when we come back to now, time stops leaking, it holds us, it includes us, and we begin to feel, perhaps for the first time in a while, that we have enough. Not because everything is done, but because we're finally here. This doesn't require changing our whole lives. It doesn't mean moving to the countryside or quitting everything that asks something of us. It just means finding small ways to restore rhythm where we can. A morning that starts a little more slowly. A pause before the next conversation. An evening with less noise. These aren't escapes. They're returns. Invitations to remember the kind of time that feels like home. The kind of time that the body already knows how to live in. Steady, unhurried, full of space for being human. It's not always easy. There will be days when urgency pulls us out again, when the schedule demands attention, when thoughts speed up and the rhythm tightens. But that's part of it too. Presence isn't about getting it right all the time. It's about noticing when we've drifted and choosing gently to return. Without judgment, without self-criticism. Just a quiet remembering, oh, I'm here again. And each time we do that, each time we return to a slower, fuller experience of time, the pattern deepens. The nervous system begins to trust the pace. The mind becomes less reactive. The body settles into a steadier rhythm. And the days, while still full, begin to feel more lived. Not because they're perfect, but because we're actually inside them. And over time, this shapes the memory of our lives. We look back, not on a blur of tasks, but on moments that had shape, texture, depth. We remember how the air felt in the afternoon, the sound of someone's voice in the quiet, the sense of having truly been there. These memories don't need to be extraordinary. Their power comes from having been felt, fully, calmly, as part of time, not apart from it. This is the gift of gentle presence. It doesn't promise ease. It doesn't erase responsibility, but it restores something essential, our belonging in the flow of time. Not as something separate or behind or outside of life, but as part of it, moving with it, noticing it, living in it, one breath at a time. The more we allow ourselves to live within time rather than against it, the more we notice how deeply time is connected to meaning. Not in a grand, philosophical way, but in the small, quiet patterns of daily life. Meaning doesn't always appear in moments of celebration or major change. It often reveals itself in repetition, in rhythm, in familiarity. The way sunlight moves across the same wall each morning. The way someone's footsteps sound when they return home. The pause we take before turning off a light at night. These things may seem unremarkable, but over time they become threads in the fabric of our experience. They anchor us. They remind us where we are in time and who we are inside of it. And when those patterns are interrupted, when something ends, when someone leaves, when a season shifts, we feel it, even if we don't have words for it. Time takes on a new texture. It may feel thinner, stretched, strange. We notice the absence of rhythm, the missing note in the song of our day. And this, too, is part of time. Not just the passing of it, but the way it holds memory, the way it carries both presence and loss, both repetition and change. Learning to live inside this kind of time means learning to befriend change, not in theory, but in feeling. To allow the structure of the day to hold us even when we don't know what comes next. To let routines give shape to uncertainty. To let simple rituals offer comfort when larger things feel out of reach. These structures aren't limitations. They're expressions of care, ways we steady ourselves in the flow, ways we say to ourselves, I am here, this is today, and I will meet it with presence, no matter how ordinary it may seem. Because time doesn't ask us to be extraordinary. It asks us to show up, to inhabit what's already unfolding. And often when we do, we discover that the ordinary contains more than we thought. A conversation we didn't expect to remember becomes one we return to. A walk we almost skipped becomes a turning point. A quiet hour alone becomes a moment of deep clarity. These things don't happen because we try harder. They happen because we're present enough to receive them. And presence, when it meets time, creates meaning. That meaning doesn't need to be named. It doesn't need to be turned into a lesson. It just needs to be felt, allowed, lived through, and trusted. Trusted that it'll stay with us in ways we don't need to control. Because time, when lived fully, leaves traces, not just in our calendars or our photos, but in our bodies, in our way of moving, in the quiet knowing that we were there and that it mattered, even if only to us. And that too is enough, that we lived a moment fully, that we met time not as something to conquer or escape, but as something to hold, however briefly. These moments add up, slowly, quietly, without fanfare. But they shape us, they soften us, they make it easier to stay in ourselves in the moment, in the quiet unfolding of life as it really is. Not always exciting, not always easy, but always, in some way, worthy of being felt. There is a kind of quiet strength that grows from living in time this way. It doesn't come from doing more or knowing more. It comes from staying present long enough to feel the full shape of things, from allowing the moment to be whole, even if it's small, even if it's not what we expected, especially then. Because often the most grounding moments are not the ones we plan, but the ones we notice, the ones that find us when we stop moving so fast. This strength isn't loud, it doesn't push, it doesn't need to prove itself. It shows up in patience, in gentleness, in the willingness to be here, even when here is imperfect, even when it's unclear, even when it's quiet and still and doesn't look like progress, because this kind of presence is progress in its own way. It's what allows growth to happen slowly and fully without being rushed past the stage where real roots are formed. This is also why time spent in presence often feels more nourishing than time spent in distraction, even if it's the same amount of time. An hour fully lived feels different than an hour rushed through. And we don't always need to change our schedules to feel this difference. Sometimes it's just about softening how we move inside the time we already have, about bringing a little more attention to the task we're doing, about remembering that even this, whatever this is part of life. We don't need to wait for a better moment. This one, the one we're in right now, is already unfolding. It already carries the textures and shapes of being alive. We can step into it fully, not because it's perfect, but because it's here, because it's real, because it's the only moment we're ever truly inside. The rest is memory or anticipation, both important, but neither as immediate as now. This doesn't mean forcing ourselves to be mindful every second. It doesn't mean rejecting planning or reflecting. It just means recognizing when we've lost touch with the present and offering ourselves a way back, gently, without judgment, like returning to a familiar path, like sitting down in a chair that's always been waiting. And the more often we return, the easier it becomes. Not because we've mastered anything, but because the mind begins to trust that it doesn't always have to run, that it can rest, that it can let go, even briefly, of the belief that time is running out. Because time, in its deepest sense, isn't something we use up. It's something we move through, something that shapes us as much as we shape it. And when we move through it with presence, we don't just fill time. We are filled by it. That's the quiet truth that presence reveals. That we are not separate from time. We are not behind it. We are not too late. We are already in it. Living, breathing, feeling, moving through a life that is still unfolding, one moment at a time. And so we continue gently through the shape of time, not as something to conquer or fix, but as something to live inside with softness. The longer we spend in this mindset, the more we realize how much of our struggle with time was never really about the hours or minutes themselves. It was about pressure, about the expectation that time must be filled efficiently, that stillness must be earned, that life is something we must catch up with before it passes us by. But that belief begins to dissolve in the presence of lived time. We see that time has never truly been the problem. It's the story we were taught about how it must be used and what it means about us if we fall out of step with it. Because real time, natural, unforced time, is patient. It doesn't rush us. It doesn't measure our worth. It simply continues, offering us moment after moment without resentment and without demand. The sun rises whether we are ready or not. The day moves forward whether we are prepared or lost in thought. The evening arrives whether we made progress or not. Time is not waiting for us to get it right. It is offering itself as a space, open, unfolding, quietly consistent, within which our lives can happen. And our lives do happen, even in the spaces where we think they don't. In the pauses, in the boredom, in the moments when nothing seems to be changing. These stretches of slow time, often misunderstood or ignored, are rich with quiet formation. Emotions are processed. Ideas are shaped. Nervous systems recalibrate. The mind makes meaning, silently like roots growing beneath the surface. And when we look back, we often find that these periods weren't empty after all. They were fertile, essential, full of small shifts that prepared us for the next movement, even if we didn't see it at the time. This is why rest isn't separate from growth, why slowness isn't a failure. It's why long walks, silent afternoons, and ordinary evenings hold so much invisible importance. They allow us to become, not perform, not prove, but become. And becoming takes time. Time that is not rushed, time that does not demand. Time that moves like water, not like a race. Flowing, circling, softening everything in its path. Even us. When we allow ourselves to meet time with this softness, we also become more compassionate with others, but also with ourselves. We stop asking the impossible. We stop expecting to feel clear all the time or energized or productive. We begin to make room for natural fluctuations. We begin to see that tiredness is not failure. That confusion is not a sign we're broken. That slowness is not a weakness. These are all simply parts of the cycle. Parts of being alive in a body that feels, senses, reacts, recovers. And the more we honor those cycles, the more trustworthy life feels. Not predictable, but trustworthy. We come to see that even when we don't know what's coming, we can still be here. We can still breathe. We can still listen. And eventually the next moment will reveal itself. The fog will lift. The rhythm will return. We don't have to force it. We just have to stay close enough to ourselves to notice it when it does. This kind of awareness creates a quiet kind of confidence. Not the kind built on certainty or control, but the kind that knows how to stay grounded even in the middle of change. It says, I can move slowly. I can wait. I can respond when it's time, not before. It says, I don't need to have the entire plan figured out before I take the next step. I just need to be present enough to notice when that step is ready. That's what trust in time really is. Not believing that everything will be easy, but knowing that we can meet things as they come. And when we live this way, when we stay in close relationship with time, we begin to see more clearly what really matters to us, not in theory, but in sensation, in how certain moments feel, in which parts of the day nourish us, and which ones drain us, in what kind of time we long for and what kind we're ready to release. This is not about optimizing, it's about aligning, about letting our lived time reflect our lived values, even in small ways, even when everything around us still moves fast. Because the truth is, we don't need every hour to be different. In order to feel time more fully, we just need a few moments to open. A few spaces where the pressure drops and presence returns. A few places where the mind can stop rehearsing or remembering and simply arrive. And those moments, once felt, stay with us. They remind us that time can feel different, that life can move slower, that we can be here, truly here. Even in the middle of everything, we might still glance at the clock. We might still count the days. But something has changed. Time no longer feels like something to manage. It feels like something we're inside of, something we're allowed to feel, something we don't have to fix or chase or explain. Just something we live, moment by moment, breath by breath. One unfolding at a time. And perhaps what's most comforting about this way of being with time is that it doesn't rely on conditions. It doesn't require silence or simplicity or a particular kind of environment. It's not reserved for slow days, for peaceful spaces, or for when everything is in order. This presence, this soft awareness of time as something lived rather than measured, can exist anywhere, even in noise, even in motion, even in a day filled with responsibilities, because it's not about removing life's demands. It's about shifting how we meet them. Even a crowded schedule has space in it, between things, inside things, brief pauses that usually go unnoticed. The moment before we answer a call, the breath before we respond, the way our hand feels on a door handle. These tiny spaces are always there, not empty but quiet, waiting. And when we begin to notice them, they grow, they widen, they remind us that we're not just doing things, we're living them. That even now, in the middle of everything, we are here. We are part of this hour, this moment, this breath. And maybe that's all presence really is, a willingness to be part of time instead of racing against it. A quiet decision to live the day from the inside out, not to control it or shape it into something impressive, just to feel it, just to know from within what it's like to be alive right now. Because right now is not static. It moves with us, it changes shape, it softens when we soften. And the more we return to it, the more it begins to feel like home. In this home, the pressure lifts, not completely, not permanently, but enough. Enough to breathe, enough to listen, enough to remember that we were never meant to feel like machines moving through blocks of time. We were meant to feel like people, in motion, in rhythm, in relationship with the hours we're given. Not squeezing meaning from every second, but allowing meaning to unfold. Not tracking every task, but remembering the taste of a moment fully felt. And this remembering over time becomes its own form of grounding. When we feel lost, we come back to the rhythm of the day. When we feel overwhelmed, we come back to the breath. When we feel like time is running too fast, we slow down inside just one part of it. We bring our attention there, not to fix it and just to be with it. To remind ourselves that presence doesn't require more time. It just requires a different way of being in it. And the beautiful thing is, this presence is renewable. No matter how long we've been rushing, no matter how far we've drifted, it's always here, always one breath away, one pause away, one soft moment of noticing away. We don't have to wait for a better version of ourselves to begin again. We can begin from where we are, with whatever time we have left in the day, with whatever state we happen to be in. This is what it means to feel time rather than just watch it, to live alongside it instead of inside a story about how it should feel. And when we do, even briefly, we begin to reclaim something quiet and essential. The feeling that life is not elsewhere, that it's not waiting to begin, that it's already happening, and that we're not late, we're not behind, we're not missing it, we're in it, fully, finally, gently, here. And as this day comes to a close, and the quiet shape of night settles gently around you, there is nothing more you need to do. Time will continue, soft and unhurried, and you're part of it still, without effort, without expectation. Let it carry you now, not forward, not back, but simply inward, into rest, into stillness, into the rhythm that needs back nothing from you but your presence. The hours ahead ask nothing. The moment is already enough. Good night. Sleep well